And as always, this is kind of biggest rules. What happens here stays here. If someone shares something in this space, they may not necessarily feel safe sharing that outside of the space. So just keep that in mind as we're here. So Heatherly, are we good to go ahead and record, do you think?
I did. I actually took that as a prompt and I hit go. So yes,
okay, cool.
Right there.
Oh, there it is. I see it now.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm Jacqueline. I go by she, her, or she, they is also fine by me. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This is a very discussion-oriented kind of talk. And I'm going to do a brief introduction of Charlie, which I'm going to also share in the chat if it will let me copy and paste this. Okay. All right. So Charlie Shockley is an LCSW who graduated from UGA in 2015. Charlie interned at drug court and mental health court and spent 3 years working in outpatient treatment centers, the Commencement Center, and the Athens Addiction Recovery Center. Charlie started Kind Recovery after receiving an LCSW with the goal of truly meeting people where they are at and ending the shame-based or AA treatments, because Charlie saw those treatments as the only way practices that were normed in recovery treatment. Sorry, give me a second to copy and paste, just so folks can read if that's more of your medium. Charlie is an advocate for a many paths approach and rejects the binaries of abstinence versus harm reduction or disease model versus the trauma model. Charlie works to offer a truly trauma-informed biopsychosocial spiritual approach. Charlie has experience with practice models, including ACT, MI, and EMDR primarily. Charlie has also worked with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and Charlie plans to expand trauma services into the realm of psychedelics as these medicines become legal options. And before that, Charlie utilizes a harm reduction approach. So Charlie, welcome to our group. We are a very friendly, discussion-based group. We are all students. We are all here to learn, and we deeply, deeply value you taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you. I have to correct you, even though I gave you that information. I started school in 2000 and graduated into it in 2007. So I just want to make sure it's accurate.
Can everyone hear Charlie well? Okay.
Yeah.
You might need to adjust your microphone, Charlie.
The connection might be a little wonky.
How about that?
That sounds much, yes.
Much better, thank you.
Clarify, I started school in 2015 and graduated in 2017. So that's just an inaccuracy that I provided, so.
No worries. I think the first question that we are going to kind of ask you as a group here, and y'all feel free to popcorn stuff, just an open dialogue would be great. So Charlie, our first question, I've added it in the chat. Can you tell us more about why you chose to create your for-profit Kind Recovery? Kind of what brought you to this work, essentially?
So it's actually a pretty good story, full of adversity, so I'll tell that. When I started social work school, I thought I would go into hospice. That was my plan, but I got a placement. My first placement was at a substance use treatment center. And being a person in recovery, I don't know why it didn't occur to me to work with that population. I had limited exposure, so I just fell in love with them and ended up doing my second placement in mental health drug court that also had a lot of big substance use piece. When I graduated, I was panicked, like probably most of you are anticipating. I was driving Uber and met somebody who worked at the Commencement Center and asked them if they were hiring, and they were like, oh yeah, I mean, no, I think that's a secret. So I sent somebody a message on LinkedIn and got an interview and started working there. It was a great place to work, a really good experience, but they had difficulty with keeping up census, and so I was laid off. And panicked again, but then I was quickly recruited by the Recovery Center, which is the other outpatient center here in town, and worked for them for a while. Absolutely loved it there, probably would have stayed for life, but I got fired because I asked for more money. So that was a trauma. And so at that point, I was kind of like, hey, I have this work that I love to do, and I'm really passionate about it, but there's nowhere else left in town to do it. So kind of didn't have much of a choice at that point. And I have a background in sales, marketing, and business. I did that for 10 years before social work school. So part of my way of just kind of making sense of my world was to start, I just started building a website. I don't know that I had a particular plan. It was just sort of a soothing option. And then I was like, kind of grew in the ideas like, why can't I do this? I could probably do this. Like, I'll be upset with myself if I don't give it a try. So I did. And it's been pretty successful. Had a full caseload probably within 6 months. And I'm going to be adding a few staff members probably in 2022. So yeah, little adversity, little overcoming, little scared hope, and it all worked out okay.
So I have another question for you, kind of specifically about what kind of modalities and methods you choose to use. And feel free to expand on this or whatever. And if other folks have questions, just pop your hand up, toss them in the chat. You can send them directly to us, whatever feels comfortable for you. So my next question is, why do you choose to use ACT, MI, and EMDR over other modalities? And can you define those three modalities and kind of describe them? Because we hear a lot of acronyms, but I'm not sure we're all there yet.
No doubt. When I was in school, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and social work school was a great reason to be super perfect. So I was feeling a lot of anxiety between what I was being taught and what I was going to be asked to do in the field, and felt like there wasn't enough resources in terms of how to learn how to do individual counseling. So I started sort of obsessively reading and researching and listening to podcasts about acceptance and commitment therapy. And that's something that came to me, I think, second year in the advanced class. We looked at all the sort of different treatment modalities, and that one stood out to me. And one of the reasons that I really fell in love with ACT is because my previous exposure of CBT and trying to argue with my thoughts, change my thoughts, I found was really kind of stigmatizing and awful. Not that there's not a place for that. If you want to do CBT, go for it. But for me, as a person with a trauma history, like those thoughts were pretty automatic and didn't feel like they could be adjusted, and ended up kind of feeling like I was in a war with myself. And acceptance and commitment therapy kind of really speaks to that in terms of like, thoughts are just thoughts, right? That we actually shouldn't be engaged in the process of trying to argue with our thoughts, because when we do, we magnify them. And the research supported that in terms of like CBT had great short-term outcomes, but people sort of couldn't keep up the fight, and ACT had much better long-term outcomes. And it's an exposure-based modality. So it's sort of, do what's meaningful, what resonates with your values, even if it's difficult. And sort of the act of doing that helps create distance from the discomfort or the experiential avoidance that you might be feeling, whether that's rumination, worry, whatever it is. That and bringing in sort of the third wave CBT options like mindfulness and acceptance that really resonated with me from a Buddhist perspective. So I would say my core way of conceptualizing a client in their case is through acceptance and commitment therapy. Motivational interviewing, which is kind of interesting with my sales background, kind of gelled with me because of that. So it's interviewing, but you're focusing your attention on the change process. So your reflections and summaries and all of that are sort of meant to highlight the change process that a person is going through, and that is, it's a very person-centered approach. EMDR is something that I wanted everybody knows about EMDR. It's sort of the it modality. And I got a chance to take a training as I was growing and learning and understanding trauma better. And that was I was drawn to it because I knew it was effective, and I felt like it didn't have the tools at the time to really help people who'd experienced trauma. So learned that. And they all seem to kind of fit together for me pretty well. I'm just watching the chat box. So my clients sort of, there's kind of a predictable model of what they've been through and what they're going through. And they experience some adversity, usually in childhood, right? It might be adulthood in a relationship or some other experience. And because of that, it altered their perception of themselves or the world. And due to that altered perception, then they get busy developing ego around it, or a coping persona that at first is really effective, but then becomes maladaptive. And so that maladaptation can be lots of things, but in my case, often substance use disorder. So the pieces fit together nicely for me, and that, sometimes we'll start out with motivational interviewing. Do you want to do this? Do you want to change? Do you want to stop this behavior? Are you ready to look at your trauma? Kind of where are you, and help them make the decision about, where they want to go from here. Then EMDR to sort of stabilize, teach resources, and go back and reprocess that trauma. And then once they're stabilized, acceptance and commitment therapy is geared towards getting people into their lives instead of avoiding them, or using strategies to avoid internal experiences. And so that's sort of the behavioral approach that helps them build a life that they don't need to escape from. So I'm sort of intertwining those regularly, but they seem to work together fairly well. I don't know if I answered all of your question. I probably over answered it.
No, I thought that was awesome. Thank you. And just full disclosure, Charlie got me in contact with the person I'm using now for EMDR. And I love it. I think as a person with trauma, it's worked for me because I did just do that CBT and I just couldn't retain it, so full shout out. Charlie's awesome and is deeply knowledgeable. So thank you. I do have a full list of questions. And I think what I'm going to do next is ask one more in particular, because I want people to kind of hear about this. But for creating your for-profit business, how did you go about that? How would you recommend we go about it if people are interested in opening their own practice? I mean, you graduated in 2017 and already having your own practice up and going is amazing. So I think folks would maybe love to hear about that. And then let's open it up to others for questions, if that's all right by you.
Yeah. So first I want to say, I think that substance use and trauma is an area of practice that has been ignored for a long time. And there's a big community of people who need those services. So I think, I'm kind of surprised I have a practice, that close to graduation, but it's a big need in our community. So I think that's part of why it's been successful. So it does seem really scary. It's actually not so scary. It's really just a matter of a few steps, like getting an LLC, which costs about $100. You can go to LegalZoom and get that done. Then setting up simple practice, which costs $60, $70 a month, right? Putting a listing on Psychology Today, which is where you'll get the vast majority of your clients, costs about $30 a month. And open a business checking account, and you're pretty much good. It's really not that bad.
That is awesome to hear. Sorry, Go ahead.
Well, virtual just opens up so many options. I have a physical space that I use on Mondays because I like to do group therapy. But it's just totally doable. And there's no limit. There's no scarcity of clients. The therapist community here in town, we're very supportive of each other. Nobody's competing with each other. There's plenty of space.
That's very comforting to hear, frankly. So thank you.
Yeah, if I could add, I think when I graduated, I thought group practice was really far on the horizon, and maybe had to get really good at stuff and develop a reputation and then network, and then maybe people would want to bring you into their group practice. But the reality is that no group practice is ever really going to advertise for a job opening. But, you know, since it's contract work, sort of the more counselors they have, the more they make. So don't be afraid to approach group practices when you graduate and say, hey, you're doing something that I really like and I want to be a part of it. And do you have, you know, can we talk about that?
Thank you. That is awesome advice. I see a couple questions in the chat popping in. George, I saw yours first. Do you feel comfortable asking that to the group?
Yes, sure. Yeah, so basically the question I have is related to, there's a concept called clear mind in DBT, and that tries to balance like abstinence and being completely clean and harm reduction and not just thinking you're immune to everything. And so how do you Charlie, approach like balancing these two sides of the harm reduction and the abstinence?
Yeah, good question. And I hadn't heard of the clear model, so I'll have to check that out.
Recording in progress.
You know, I realize that everybody practically falls into the camp of either abstinence or harm reduction, but I sort of reject that we have to conceptualize it as one or the other, because it sort of puts a barrier between you and the person and what that person is experiencing, sort of. So I just kind of like to avoid those categories. So it's really, I think it's just about person-centered care, really doing a good assessment, understanding what their capacity is, what their skills are, the length and severity of their substance use, and deferring to them at first to try whatever thing feels like it will be helpful, right? So in my practice, if people want to continue smoking pot, okay, if that works for you, right? If they want to use medication-assisted treatment, great, I'm all for it. If they want to try to moderate alcohol, let's give it a try, see how it goes. It usually doesn't go very well, but you know, people are, you know, experience is our greatest teacher, right? And so really it's just about supporting somebody's vision, their goals of recovery, providing them with the resources to be successful at that, and also building in sort of some flexibility and saying, hey, we're going to try this, let's see how it goes. And then we'll reassess at a certain time and see if we need to make changes. So it's kind of a matter of just sort of holding things lightly and having faith in people's internal strengths, you know, their own internal compass. You know, usually that works. Sometimes people fall in a rigid category, but usually that works. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I was just curious. So, and I don't know a lot about this topic, so that's why I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think people are really want to have a specific definition of addiction, a specific idea about how to treat it, because that's comforting, right? But I think if we do that, then we miss the individual.
So our next question is from Elise. Elise, do you feel comfortable reading your question out loud? And I'll copy it again into the chat as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, can you hear me, or are you getting some feedback?
I hear you.
Okay. I guess my question was, my understanding is, you know, wouldn't you have to have an LCSW in order to have your own practice, or do you have a supervisor? Like, how does that work for Charlie?
Technically, you have to have an LCSW to be able to accept payment. So me, as an individual, I am my private practice, an LLC. I have to have an LCSW in order to be in private practice. But as an LMSW, you can work for a group practice and they accept the money and then transfer it on to you as a 1099 employee. It's the money accepting thing. Without that, you could technically be on your own and have a supervisor, and supervisor direction gets difficult when you graduate. Mostly that's going to happen in the context of a group practice.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. So it sounds like, and I may have missed this earlier, so it sounds like after you had graduated, you basically accrued those hours in order to sit for your L, and then did that and then started your own practice?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask Charlie?
Well, I think Susan had a question in the chat.
Yeah, mine was kind of nuts and bolts, but I was just wondering where you see people. Do you have an office to yourself? Is it something that you share with other people? How do you feel comfortable? What can you tell me about that part?
Yeah. So this is my home office. I would say it's where I do 90% of my work. And I really don't have many clients who are requesting in-person counseling at this time. I think it's just efficient for them. And they've kind of gotten acclimated to it. But I do have an office space in the Leathers building on Pulaski Street that I see people who prefer in-person counseling on Mondays, as well as run a group on Monday nights. And that is a space that I do share with people. It used to be the lobby of Rubber Soul Yoga, and we turned it into a kind of a individual and group counseling space.
I've been in that lobby.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. We get a train issue every once in a while, but it works for my purposes.
Can I ask a question? So under the kind of model of recovery that you're working with, how do you define success?
Good question. Yeah, and that depends on each individual person, right? So let's use an example. So maybe I have somebody who they're drinking regularly and they feel like it's a problem in maybe one area of their life. And they come to me and we do an assessment, and they say what they really want to be able to do is moderate their drinking. So then we'll come up with a specific treatment plan based on their goals for moderation that are going to include activities that support abstinence on the days that they're not planning to drink, and specifics about how much they're planning to drink and when, and that will be our initial plan. And along the way, we'll deal with any missteps or areas where resources need to be added. And usually I schedule an assessment about 90 days to say, hey, where are we? How are we doing? Is this plan working? And from there, we'll try to set, a new goal for success. So success can change along the way. And again, it's like experience is our greatest teacher. Sometimes we just have to be flexible and keep working around the issue and figuring out what works for each individual person. And I think it's kind of weird, like people, well, there's not a lot of practitioners where if you come in and say, well, I want to quit drinking, but I want to keep smoking pot, they'll usually throw disease model at you and tell you why that's not going to be effective. And, I may discuss those things in the context of sharing information, motivational interviewing style, but I'm not going to impose those things, right? People have a right to make an informed decision, but it's always their decision. Yeah, so constant reassessment, I think.
So Dave had a question that was sent to me. Dave, do you feel like asking your question next?
Sure. Hi, Charlie. Thanks for coming. I was curious about folks who do practice out of their home and see clients at their home. Does that come with any safety issues for you?
I don't see clients in my home, and I only practice virtually from my home.
Okay. Okay.
I would be concerned about that, yeah.
Anyone else have some questions? Because I can pull from some of ours too.
Yes, I have one. Was someone else going?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in.
Okay,
really quick.
Go ahead.
Can you tell me, Charlie, a little bit about your pivot from your prior background? I have a similar story. I'm coming from information technology for about 20 years. So what was that like for you? And do you have any advice in regard to the pivot?
Yes. I felt kind of like a reckless bungee jump into the void. Yeah. was really scary because you've invested all this time and effort into a career, but maybe you, like me, came to the point where you opted for meaning and purpose over something that you were good at. And, sales and marketing was something I was good at. It's something other people told me I should do. And I kind of, learned all I wanted to learn, but man, did I feel empty. And I definitely think it contributed to my addiction, sort of living that fail success life. Like, I got a sale, I failed. I got a sale, I failed, right? It was unhealthy for me. And I think that there's skills in that career that you will probably find ways to bring into your work as a social worker, or at least that was my experience. And I think, man, was it worth it, right? It was so worth it.
Thank you for that. It's very encouraging. Thank you.
You're welcome.
George, did you still have a question?
Oh, yes. So I guess your experience when you first started with your generalist placement, Charlie, kind of has some alignment with mine. I got put at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center, but I don't know anything about drugs or alcohol. So do you have any advice for someone that got that kind of a placement, but is like learning everything for the first time?
Yeah. I'm happy for you. I think one of the things that people quite don't get about treatment for substance use disorders, I think it's sort of all about triggers and not using, and it's sort of like super skills based. But in my perspective, there's no more complicated issue than substance use disorder, right? And I think of substance use as a symptom, not the source. And so there's so many layers to the source. But I think you'll also find that the folks who are fighting for recovery are just generally good-hearted, loving, sensitive, courageous folks, right? That, if you can see that, that's probably all you're going to need for your first placement. There's a really good TED Talk about learning mind that you might want to look up. And I don't think you have to know everything, right? Like, you are at a learning placement. Your job is to learn, to be helpful, showing up as yourself with gratitude and appreciation for the clients and their journey. But there are certainly some books that you could read if you're interested. One that I would strongly recommend is The Wisdom to Know the Difference, which is a workbook based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And that it's not that big. Like, I know you got a ton to read, but it might give you an orientation, just how to handle topics and do it with flexibility. Like, nobody really needs you to come in and be the expert. They just need you to see them. Yeah. Was that comforting at all?
Yeah, that's good. I'm starting to see, like, or just what you were sharing, it's like embody the NASW code of ethics and like you're already well on your way. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I kind of think like Mr. Rogers didn't have a counseling degree, right? But he sure knew how to make people feel seen and heard. And like, if you can show up with that, that's already so much better than what they're getting in their personal lives and their families at work. So.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to learn. I think I got this. So.
Cool.
So Charlie, as a person who has been duly diagnosed myself with mental health and substance abuse disorder, I think my greatest anxiety about being in the field and serving others is that like sense of self-care. Like, how do I take care of myself? How do I recognize secondary trauma or when I'm feeling triggered? And how do I navigate that with clients sometimes? So I'm kind of wondering from your perspective, like, what do you think the best advice is in terms of like self-care and honoring ourselves in this work?
I want to put some and take a moment for that. It's a struggle for everybody, right? So you're certainly not alone in that. for me, there are certain habits that really support my mental health and well-being while managing clients in a practice. And that's eating in a particular way, exercising every day, making sure that I have a supportive friends and community, a supportive partner. All of those things that you guys probably already know about are kind of super important. In terms of navigating with clients, you know, I sort of adopt a silliness in practice, right? That staying flexible, staying humble, staying silly, like I'll let my goofy side show, right? So I'm sort of modeling like a deep, authentic humanity, right? Like I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be the expert. I just be like a human with you. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure out of it, and the clients really respond to it, right? They don't want to come in and feel like they're reporting to you like you're with your notepad and you're like reading glasses and you've got them all psychoanalyzed. Like they want to see you as a person. And I know that feels like you have to be that when you're in social work school, but you don't. Like you just have to be yourself, maintain good boundaries, and take care of yourself. I don't think I would ever discuss with the client that I was experiencing any, ups or downs. But, you'll have to determine probably at first with your supervisor, like if you've had enough and you need to take some time for yourself, then that's important to do. But you'll have a supervisor to guide you through that, at least initially.
Thank you. That is beautiful. And Susan also is speaking that into existence in the chat. Dave had a question about business, and I also see Heather Lee's hand, so y'all feel free to ask.
Hey, Charlie, I was wondering, how do you learn to run a business? And are there resources that you would advise us to take advantage of?
Yeah, there's the SBDC, which is the Small Business Development Center at UGA. And you can meet with them and they can sort of tell you all the steps. I did talk to them when I first got started, and it was funny because I told them about the expenses in the business, and they were kind of like, wow, that sounds like a good business. And that's that transition to telehealth and like the limited expenses that are associated with running a practice in a virtual environment. But it is, as soon as I started my practice, I started getting phone calls from peers probably about every 2 weeks about how did you do it? What did you do? And, I did the same thing. So there will always be people out there, peers, that are happy to support you and tell you exactly what to do. It's just a matter of reaching out and networking. If you get to that point, feel free to call me. I'll help you figure it out. Yeah.
So I'll jump in real quick. Thank you for that. What I was actually raising my hand to say was thank you for that sense of silliness, because that's something that I have found is I call it play. I call it being just very lighthearted and being ridiculously excited over things. Yeah. Just because I'm the age that I am doesn't mean I don't get to be playful or giddy or silly about things. But I also wanted to point out that the Small Business Development Center, and I put this in chat, they are actually physically housed at the same building that our UGA Gwinnett campus is. So just wanted to put that out there. All right, I'm hushing my face now.
And if I could add just a little story, I brought some Oracle cards into group last week. And I don't know if you guys know what they are, but they're kind of like tarot cards, but they're really abstract. So you can kind of see, like, pull one and think, this relates to my life in this way. And we were just being so goofy and silly with it. Like you had to find the card that was warm, otherwise that wasn't your card, right? And like channeling the spirits and whatever. So there's so much room to have fun in this, and especially with substance use clients, when you do an assessment, there's always the question, what do you do for fun? None of them have an answer, right? They're just not a part of their life that they cultivated. So play and modeling play is such a big deal. Thank you for that.
So we have about 7 minutes left with Charlie. Does anybody else have questions?
Who wants to ask me about psychedelics?
Oh yeah, please talk about psychedelics. I would love to know more. Alan is applauding that too, so yes.
So I I came into working with psychedelics because the outpatient center I worked at also had a ketamine clinic. And I got the chance to have a ketamine infusion myself, and it was mind-blowing, and broke down all the levels of perfectionism that I thought were gone already. And then I was like, oh, wow, I'm just not even important at all. So having had that experience and help other clients who are going through recovery and also receiving ketamine do integration therapy afterwards it's been incredibly moving. One of the things I'll do is I always sort of identify their core negative belief before we go into ketamine. And, maybe that's I'm not worthy or I'm unlovable or whatever that is. And I'll ask them about it right after their ketamine session, and they always laugh. They think it is so funny, right? I'll say, I want to say some words and I want to, just notice how your body and your brain respond to it. And I'll say like, I'm not worthy. And they're like, that's hilarious. Like, it just doesn't even make sense to them anymore. So I've experienced that there's a lot of healing possibilities in this realm. I think the research is still developing, and it's, I'm completely here for it. My business partner and I, side business is going to be providing harm reduction integration therapy for folks who've decided to use psychedelics on their own. And this is respect for the individual deciding this is your healing path, this is what you've decided, but you don't have to do it alone. So not providing psychedelics, not sitting with people while they're on psychedelics, all that is illegal and unethical, but supporting people who make those choices is, I think, part of our code of ethics.
I have a question. What is your stance on microdosing?
It's very interesting. I've read a bit about it. There's not a lot of great research yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be soon. I think probably most of what I know comes from following a Facebook page. It's like microdosing 101 or something, yeah. And just reading people's experiences.
Yeah.
But I certainly think it has a lot of potential.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Oh, sorry if did I cut someone off?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I have two questions. You're finding success using it with treatment-resistant depression and addiction. Can you maybe talk briefly about other areas that psychedelics have been really useful in, and some areas where psychedelics should not be used?
Yeah, anybody who has an immediate family history of psychosis or a history of psychosis it's contraindicated. So for instance, somebody who has a parent that has bipolar 1 disorder, like it's not advised for them to do it because it might trigger their first manic episode. Same with schizophrenia. So I would hold this lightly and not be the expert, because I don't think anybody is the expert on psychedelics yet. But I think that from my experience working with different kinds of clients, it's usually folks who have a really rigid ego, right? That they have been kind of retracing the same steps in their brain over and over and over again, and have a really hard time stepping outside of the coping mechanism or the coping strategies and the thought processes and the beliefs that are all wrapped up in the definition of me, right? Those are the people that seem to do really well using psychedelics. I've seen people with substance use disorder, depression, anxiety, all have good results, but the rigid ego seems to be the predicator of whether or not it's going to be a really great experience. I know there's a person over here, Cisaye. I can't, you've been trying to ask a question.
Yes, I saw your hand go up too. Is there another question?
Can I make a quick question, maybe a silly question? What would be your advice for a person that work with clients from the drug course that they have layers of trauma?
That they are drug court and they have what?
I'd say any advice for us who work with or trying to support clients from the drug core?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you working with, is that your placement, working with drug court?
Well, actually, I volunteer for I guess I'll be able to mention it here. It's a new horizon here in Muscogee County. And I've been doing the life skills program through the extension office. And it really is a challenge. And it is, I fell in love with this group and trying to do something good for them, at least in the area of nutrition. And that I know is very important, that you're talking about how important it was to eat well and exercise. That's my role right now, helping this group. And I, of course, encounter a lot of challenges to encourage them a healthy and lifestyle and in making good food choices.
Yeah, they don't have those skills so much. From my personal experience, I think they just need to know you're there. Like, you got them, like you see them, you're not judging them, you know, that you can roll with it. They're really, as being mandated, you know, generally distrustful, right? And so building that relationship is key, but also having fun. And this seems to be the topic of today. I remember doing a life skills class around MacGyver, and I'm maybe aging myself, but if anybody remembers MacGyver, like, we used it in terms of like problem solving and thinking about things from different angles, and we played like budgeting Monopoly and, you know, stuff like that. So they're stuck there. A lot of it really sucks, and they're just sort of, you know, being fed information after information. So, you know, like, maybe if you can imagine being an intern and a kindergarten teacher at the same time, not to infantilize, but like, keep it fun if you can.
Excellent. I think it's encouraging. Thank you.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us today. We have our second speaker. We just really enjoyed this talk, and I learned a lot, and I value your time. Before you go, do you mind if you could share maybe your email in the chat if anybody wants to personally reach out? If not, that's totally fine. We can reach out via Bridging the Gap, but if you feel comfortable sharing your email, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm super comfortable with it, you guys. Like, you'll find that most people in the community want to support you. So feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlie. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, guys. Bye, Riley.
Hi, Charlie.
So Riley is going to introduce himself and tell us all about Access Point of Georgia. Riley is a brilliant human being, has opened multiple nonprofits here in Athens, just a deeply caring, deeply thoughtful person. And I'm just so appreciative that you can be here with us. Feel free to introduce yourself and just, you know, spill your guts about Access Point and why you're doing it and the purpose you serve. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Absolutely. And thank you for that non-introduction introduction. It was very kind. Yeah, so I'm Riley Kirkpatrick, Riley Coyote on social media. People often think that's my last name, but it's not. I did that hoping that like clients and peers and such couldn't find me on social media, but it didn't really work. But yeah, so I'm a founding board member and program director of Access Point of Georgia, Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are essentially a harm reduction program. And we're currently the only harm reduction program in Georgia outside of Atlanta. The Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition has existed for quite some time, but it was not legal. Well, the syringe service programs under the umbrella of harm reduction was not legal. We did a lot of work about 2 or 3 years ago to get those laws changed so that syringe service, syringe exchange, Access to clean injection equipment, all of that stuff is not illegal, both for those of us who distribute, and we're working on some local ordinance to make sure that our participants are safe as well. So yeah, I mean, I'll kind of let Jacqueline drive as far as questions and stuff, but I could talk about harm reduction all day long. I'm very passionate about it. I'm passionate about kind of nonprofit work in general. I'm also transgender. I was born female, transitioned to male, started like 20 some years ago. And I started Athens Queer Collective, which has been really hard through the pandemic, and have not been able to be like as present with it, but just through that same lenses of like need from my own experience. And I'm from the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, and I moved to Georgia, and there just were no resources. So as a trans person, I really needed recovery. I needed community, and also being in recovery myself. I am also in recovery, in long-term recovery from opioid use disorder. And that this whole topic has affected my life very, very much. I have an older brother that became HIV positive in the early 90s. I myself contracted hepatitis C as a teenager because of injection use. And I have been blessed with a wildly different life than I lived for a good 20 years. And I'm insanely grateful for that, and really just like doing everything that I can for my people. And I say that both like the queer community, people who use drugs, people trying to seek recovery, people just trying to stay alive, especially in a time of like such a poison drug supply and fentanyl. And it's a really hard time to navigate through all that stuff. So anyway, I went off on a little tangent there, but that's me.
So y'all feel free to pop in and ask questions. Riley is an open book, and I've seen him speak at so many places, and he's just great. Yeah, Susan, go ahead.
I should probably start because could you give like a quick, like if you and I met at a party and I said harm reduction, can you tell me about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you do it? Because I think I'm a beginner. I think I get a little idea, but I don't know much.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. And like real talk, harm reduction is incredibly controversial. A lot of people that don't understand it, there's a lot of negative connotations or understandings or lack of understandings that go along with it. People often just think needle exchange and think enabling drug use, and like that's it. Like all conversation stops, and it's appeared to be enabling. So honestly, like I kind of speak my language kind of like I will tweak it to whoever I'm in front of, honestly. But in a nutshell, like harm reduction is a really big umbrella. And oftentimes people think that like it's at an opposite end of abstinence-based recovery. That is not true at all. Like abstinence-based recovery absolutely fits under the umbrella of harm reduction. There are a lot of harm reductionists that are like living their own abstinence-based recovery, but still doing the work. There are a multitude of policies and practices that put into place that essentially accept the fact that drug use exists, and rather than like criminalizing or penalizing the drug user, essentially hold safe space for them and lets them kind of say when it's time. As a harm reduction program, we offer a multitude of services in addition to just syringe exchange. The syringe exchange is really just where active users come and see that they're safe. And a lot of them are very shocked that like, we don't want anything from them. They're allowed to be anonymous. We're not affiliated with anyone, but we do warm handoffs to treatment. We have peers in recovery that just essentially can be taillights for them to follow. A lot of people that are actively using have no idea of what recovery is or what people in recovery look like. It's a lot of things. We finally received some grant funding and we signed a lease, and we've literally been doing outreach on the street this last year. And we're just about to move into a location, and we get to hire medical, we get to do in-house HIV and Hep C testing. My hope is that we'll be able to do Hep C treatment also in the not too far off future. But there's not a doubt in my mind, our services will grow as we do. Yeah, so in a nutshell, if we were at a party, that's kind of what it would look like. Yeah.
Hey, Riley, I have a question kind of related. How do you explain the concept of needle exchange to somebody who may be against it? And I ask from the standpoint of reducing disease and all that stuff.
Well, I think, and this is another one of those things where like, I would say different things depending on who it was who I was talking to. Some people are more concerned about community care. Some people don't care about the life of or the health of drug users. Some people do care only about that and then getting into abstinence-based recovery. Like there's a lot of kind of variables that happen. And again, there's a lot of misconceptions about what, like we say syringe exchange or syringe service programs, which is just like kind of newer language for needle exchange, because needle exchange is still kind of stigmatized. Or we say opioid treatment programs instead of methadone clinic, because you get this like, you get this image of what it is and it's not good, So, I mean, on different levels, like, and we finally, like harm reduction came as a result of the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s. And enough time has went on now that we have research, like we have good enough research, and we know that exchanging dirty, already used syringes for clean ones does not in any way increase drug use or enable people who are not already using to use. There's just no statistics that show that. But what it does do is help people who are already using, and many of which who have very dangerous behaviors, be more safe in their use. And honestly, I mean, to summarize, it helps keep them alive long enough to be able to enter into recovery. And when you look through the lenses of community care or public health, it costs approximately, depending on the area, about $380,000 to $400,000 per year for the medical expenses of somebody who's HIV positive, okay? It costs between 15 to 35 cents for a new syringe, right? And like the syringe is where HIV/AIDS gets spread. And we're just going directly to the point of transmission and offering education and hoping that their behaviors will get better, which they do. But that's some of the why behind that. But again, I could go on and on.
Thank you.
I should also point out, I'm trying to type as fast as I can. So if I blitz the numbers as I'm going through on this chat, trying to keep notes, I apologize in advance. Y'all are reading my typos at this point.
You're fine. And honestly, like I'm full of I'm like a harm reduction nerd. Like I can turn y'all on to some other stuff. I can send you stuff that I've put together. I do a fair bit of education on this, and like I've compiled stuff for myself. I mean, mostly like educate in our community. But there's some really good, I mean, just like the Harm Reduction Coalition, they're out of New York City and Oakland, but they have updated their website this last year. and it is beautiful and it is huge. And there is so, I mean, you could spend a week on that website. I'm not joking. Like, it is huge. Go ahead.
So jumping in real quick. So I know that you said you just gotten a grant, and congratulations, that's huge. Who are the grant makers that you're reaching out to get these grants? Because I just took my nonprofit grant writing class a few semesters ago, and it looked like it was going to be so easy just to write a grant for something that was, you know, completely banal, but something that's controversial. Where are your targets? Where are the grant makers you're looking at for these programs?
It's incredibly difficult. And I very naively did much of the same. And I was very disconnected from how many people are trying to do harm reduction work in various places of the country, especially in rural communities where it doesn't exist. And there are hundreds of us. Like, there will be 350 different agencies going after a grant with like 12 awards. I mean, the competition is insane. And we applied for more grants than I can count. In the last 2 years, I have spent more time grant writing than anything else in my life. And it was painful. I mean, we went through half a dozen no's, and especially in the beginning, like, because we were just getting started. Like, we couldn't show our, you know, fiscal responsibility from the year before. And I'm like begging people for $5 on Facebook. You know what I mean? Like we didn't have this. And then there's these like health departments and larger harm reduction programs that have been at it for decades that keep scooping in the money. And it was so hard. But this, and I'm not going to lie, like, I couldn't talk about this for a while, but I can now. But we received 2, like one fair-sized one and then one small one from the state, from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, DBHDD. And I'm not gonna lie, I was shocked. I was legit shocked. And I have worked closely with them through opioid treatment programs. And, but I will say though, I feel really proud of us because we did so well in our data collection that we were able to show them the benefits, essentially that the benefits outweighed the harm. And just did a massive amount of education. Really, I mean, anyone who will listen to me, I will talk. And it was even more so a year ago. And as we started putting our data collection together, which we've done very well with, and it's mind blowing that like, we only started this on the street in November. For probably about 6 months before that, I was doing it just at opioid treatment programs. But how much it has grown and how severe the need has shocked me. And I like knew what I was getting into. But and not only the sheer amount of numbers and the rural counties that people are coming from, but also how dangerous their behaviors are and how important it is that we're educating them and kind of like scooping them in. It's really huge. And another big part of our grant, which I'm so excited about, is after we get into our building, like we have budgeted to get a transit van where we can do mobile services. So we're doing all this data collection and seeing like where the greatest counties of need are outside of Athens Clarke County, and we can bring services to them, which is insanely exciting. Like it's so needed. It really is. Yeah, I think I answered your question. I might have went off a little bit, but
no, you did. It's both comforting and frustrating to know how difficult it is to get the money, because spending the good part of 2 years just chasing after it, that's.
Well, and I will say though, like this is a very specific niche, and like there's not a whole lot for harm reduction programs. Biden recently, in one of his epic bills, there was like an additional 30 million kicked in federally that will go to harm reduction programs. And like newer folks like us are hoping that we can like get in on some of that. I think it'll be easier for us now that we're more well established also. Like we're kind of more legit. I mean, it's hard to like be legit when I'm like, yo, I'm Riley. I sling syringes out of the trunk of my car in this parking lot. Like It's hard, but that's what I was doing, you know?
So, so talk a little bit about that. So I'm curious, you get this van, you go into communities, where do you show up on this? I mean, do you go into agencies or?
So it's like recently we've been, well, the last year we've been running out of the parking lot at Divas Who Win Freedom Center, which is an RCO. It's a recovery community organization on Hawthorne, which isn't, I mean, it's been an all right part of town. I personally, like, we really need to get to like North Avenue. It took a while though. Like, we now have permission to set up at the Homeless Day Center, which 6 months ago, a year ago, we did not. Like, we have way more support now because people understand what it is that we're doing. Again, though, like, you just, like, people just don't understand. And I don't resent that fact. I understand that it's truly just a lack of education. And especially in a place like Georgia, like, people just don't know yet. And like, we're teaching them. So yeah, so essentially what it looks like, and when I get off today between 3 and 5, I will be in the parking lot with some volunteers. We set up, I mean, my vehicle is packed so tight, like I can't even take my dog to the park. like my vehicle is just supplies. And we just kind of bring everything out, set up tables. We have like handouts, all this different informational kind of stuff, everything from like safer injection practices to like resources and referrals for treatment, letting them know other stuff that we do, education reasons why, like we do, I'm looking around for it and I don't have it. Like we like literally have this thing that's a picture of 3 different syringes up under a microscope, one that's been used 1 time, 3 times, and 6 times, and you can see how like destroyed and curled it is. And they'll walk up and be like, whoa, like I really shouldn't use the same one 20 times. And we're like, yeah. A lot of work goes into the supplies themselves. We give them little kits that has everything that they need in order to be safe. We give them individual packets of water. I do a lot of stuff at Belgene. I literally put these tiny little stickers that tells them not to let anyone else use their water, and explain to them if they're using with somebody else, pour the water into like the orange cap of a syringe and they can use that. Because it's not just the having access to a clean syringe. They need to know how, if they share cottons or cookers or any stuff like that is just as dangerous as sharing a syringe. So I mean, it does help that I have experience. So like, I just talk to them a bunch and kind of figure out like, while I'm there, what kind of education they need. I put the kits together in front of them so that I literally can walk them through everything that they get and why. Sometimes they'll try to be like, oh, well, I don't need that, or all I need is the syringes. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great. And I hear you, but I'm still going to put this in there. You can throw it away if you want. But I'll ask them, I'm like, okay, if you don't need cottons, like what are you using for cottons? And cottons are like a little filter that's used to draw it up. And they'll be like, oh, I just use cigarette filters. Butts of cigarettes. And I'm like, oh, like that's so dangerous. It's dangerous on multiple counts. There's fiberglass in it. I mean, there's like multiple things. And so many of them, like, they just don't know. They've had no education. They've never had anyone, like, they just don't know. So there's a lot of that. It has blown up. It has blown up in a way that I can't even explain. A year ago, it was like me and Allie, and we'd go out there, maybe like 2 or 3 people would come, and they were really sketchy on us. They were really paranoid. They didn't trust us. But now, like on Wednesday, we were out. There was 4 volunteers, including myself. So we have 4 people working a shift. It was 2 hours long. In a little under 2 hours, we served 58 people, and I went through over 2,100. It was like 2,130 some syringes, a lot in like an hour and 45 minutes. And like, that's insane. If you told me that a year ago that would happen, I probably wouldn't have believed you. What's so beautiful is that when we get into a location, our hours will be able to be longer, because right now we're only outside 2 days a week for 2 hours at a time. And that is a barrier for people. And it's a barrier for people on North Ave. It's a barrier for homeless folks on the other end of town. Like there's a lot of things we're mindful of that we just haven't had the capacity yet. But I say yet because in 3 months, it'll be completely different once we're in our building. Yeah, Susan, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Okay. I have a small question inside of a larger question. The small question is, if someone were volunteering for you who didn't know anything about this stuff, can that person, I'm thinking like me, can that person be successful in this area? And the larger question I could have asked Charlie too is, can someone be an effective addiction counselor who is not an ex-addict?
That is a good question. And my guess is that Charlie and I would probably answer that differently. And that's okay, because like Charlie and I have different experiences. And I think that like people who enter recovery would probably answer that differently too. I'm a certified peer specialist that my whole role and job title is centered around my lived experience. But that is a very new thing in the state of Georgia, because everything has been so clinical. But like, I don't believe that it's an either or thing. I think the clinical aspect is really important. And I think the lived experience, like peer kind of taillights to follow, is really important also. So I don't really think it's either or. I think that like we all have very important things to offer. They're just different. But the people who need help need it all. Like it's, you know, us doing different things harms no one. Like, yeah. So, and as far as the volunteer stuff, that's a really good question. And this is actually a really good time because we have a volunteer training in 2 weeks. We do, like, anyone who volunteers with us does have to go through a training before they can publicly, like, you know, like work with the public on behalf of Access Point. And honestly, I'm learning about that as I'm going. In the beginning, we would like kind of educate folks as much as we could, and like had different people kind of do a little bit of everything. Since time has went on, I've like created positions more where it's like, and what I do the best I can to include not just people with lived experience, but if there are active drug users, I encourage them to get involved too. They offer a lot to their peers that is very, very important. And yeah, so there's like different positions that different people, and now as we're growing, I mean, we need help with so many things. I mean, there's the like boots on the ground, actually like making supplies, putting kits together. Data collection is a whole lot of work, compiling the data collection, social media, like random administrative kind of bookkeeping stuff. And what is really, really hard, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to because it's true, like the grant was not that amazing, and we only had enough money for one full-time position, and that is me. And that stresses me out, like, because it is a lot. Like, it is a lot, and I can't do it all myself. And again, I'm hoping we'll have more, we'll get more grants, but like volunteers, we would not be able to do what we're doing without volunteers. Absolutely. Volunteers are much needed, and everyone is helpful in their own way. So if you do want to get involved, I'll put the thing in here. We technically already closed applications, but if anyone here is like wicked interested and excited about this and is like, oh my goodness, I have to get involved in this, fill out an application and we'll make sure to fit you in. Like, it's like, I feel like that's more important than being like, the closing date is closed. we have a website. I'll put a thing in the chat, and it will take you directly to the volunteer application. And there's like so many paragraphs that explains all the details, and then just questions that you answer. And oh, yeah, I'll start to do that right now.
Oh, I've already got it in there for you, Riley. I've added the volunteer link and everything else.
You are amazing.
Let me just say, y'all, personally, like I went to NA like years ago and I got through, like I'm still sober, but like it wasn't for me because it was an abstinence only kind of space. And Riley was the first person I met in my entire life to be like, that shit's just total crap. Like abstinence only is not for everybody. Like it works for some people, but if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean that you don't belong in this space. And that means just so much to me as a person and as an addict. That means the world to me, to have that kind of community that is not going to judge you for not being completely abstinence. So I think it's really important what you're doing with harm reduction, because you're letting people enter sobriety and recovery wherever they're at. And it's a beautiful, like, person-centered, non-judgmental thing. And I just deeply value that from you. And if you could talk a little bit about that, like how that like binary of like, you're either sober or you're not is harmful, I think that would help a lot of us to kind of talk through that maybe.
Well, and I will be straight and say that like my thinking around this has changed dramatically. Like I had many, many years that I did believe that abstinence-based recovery was the one and only way. That's what I was taught and told for many, many years. I started injecting heroin when I was 14, which that seems crazy to say now, but it was very normal at the time. But I literally, like where I was at in the country, like I could get heroin easier than I could get an adult to buy me cigarettes or beer.
Wow.
Like that's just how it was at that time. And I mean, I've been to 14 inpatient treatment centers, 14. And they were all abstinence-based, and I did 12-step stuff, and I was constantly feeling like I was failing and not good enough. For me personally, when I'm not vocal about this all the time, but I do think it's important. But when I finally was able to put continuous time together without using, it was because of medication-assisted treatment, like Suboxone and methadone at different times. Absolutely saved my life. Like it took care of my physical dependence and the insane level of craving and everything that was going on physiological with me for me to actually like be able to do the work, to engage in treatment, to engage in therapy, which I still go to therapy. Well, not still, but have off and on and am currently. But like I had many years of my own time, and I had a time when I was like taking medications for opioid use disorder and going to 12-step rooms and just lying about it. And I felt a lot of shame about it. And honestly, like the last 2 times I shot dope was when I was honest in the rooms about it. People were really, really, I just essentially was told that I wasn't really clean. And I tried to taper myself hard and fast, kicked myself into withdrawals and used, which like, of course I did. But like as my understanding around what recovery really is, and as I also do a lot of education around medication-assisted treatment, there's no methadone and almost Suboxone, like they are the most misunderstood, stigmatized medications on the planet. Like it's intense, and there's this narrative that it's substituting one drug for another. People don't understand the difference between addiction and dependence, where these medications do take care of physical dependence. And yes, the person is dependent on them, but like a vast majority of America is dependent on something, and we don't tell them, we don't tell people with diabetes that they're dependent on, that they're addicted to their insulin, or people like who take mental health meds that they're addicted to their antidepressants. Like, we don't do that, but we do that with people with substance use disorders, and it's just ignorance. But yeah, that has, the last handful of years, like, it has become important to me to be more vocal of the fact that different people's recovery looks different, but they still are deserving of support, period. And we say that all the time, that like, we show up and meet people where they are, but we don't leave them there, right? And like, wherever they want to go, we will follow them and hold them and support them. If people feel called to do faith-based recovery, if people want to be in abstinence-based, if like whatever feels right and meaningful to someone, we will support them in. We do not tell people that they have to pour themselves into the mold of one particular pathway. And from my experience, a whole lot of the addictive diseases profession, people who treat substance use disorders, do try to pour people into a particular mold. And like, I just want to say this and then I'll stop, but I remember years ago, like struggling so hard with just not shooting heroin. And like, I had a sponsor and I was going to meetings, and he was like, "How are you doing? Are you clean?" And I was like, "Yeah," like I hadn't shot dope in like 3 or 4 weeks, but I had like 2 times when I had really intense cravings, and I took a hit of pot, like I smoked weed, but I was like proud of myself that I didn't do heroin. So I tell him this, and he gets real snarky and he laughs at me, and he was like, "Huh, the kinda, like you're kinda clean. Is that like kinda being pregnant? Like you are or you aren't?" And it felt so shitty. And like, I was told I had to, start my time over. I mean, it was shitty. And like, now when I hold space for other people, like, you know what, if they haven't shot heroin in a month, but they took a bong rip 2 times, like, props to you. What can I do to support you? And like, it's just a different mentality. And I don't like, man, we had over 93,000 people die last year. It was up 30% from the year before. And like, I got involved with this drug checking stuff. Fentanyl is in everything. We used to give out fentanyl test strips. We don't anymore, because we're just like, you are shooting fentanyl. It is in there. I was just at a thing, they did 36 samples of drug testing. 35 of the 36 had fentanyl in it. Fentanyl is in everything. And I'm like, this is the day and age that we're in. And I'm like, we're gonna like tell people they're not doing good enough if they're not doing it just right. Like, are we kidding? I mean, it just like, as far as I'm concerned, if someone is surviving and is getting better, and we say that like better is better in any positive change. And really, like, when by means of statistics, when you zoom out and look at the big picture, a lot of people enter recovery by, it's like that whole narrative of like hitting bottom, and then there's this like white light experience and they never use again. Statistically, those people are very few and far between. A lot of people stop using one substance at a time. They'll put more and more abstinent time together. We'll use less harmful substances. Like, that's real. And like, it's harm reduction tells me that it's okay to support people in getting better that way. And like, I'm a fan of that. And I'm a fan of people surviving. I mean, I don't know how else to say that. Like, dead people don't recover. And like, do we really want to be self-righteous that like people are like, once somebody overdoses, like there's no chance at recovery. It's over. It's done. Like, it's a no-brainer when I think about it that way, Anyway, I get all worked up.
No, your energy and passion are beautiful, and we love them. And they're great. And George, I saw you had a question. We have about 8 minutes. So George, your question, and then Riley, I would love to know how you take care of yourself doing this work after George.
So would I.
After George's question. So go ahead, George.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my question was just like, what are some of the challenges you run into doing this kind of work as someone who has a background with substance use?
That is a good question. And honestly, some of those that I thought that would be hard haven't been that hard. And there have been other challenging things that I didn't really expect. And they're like, I'm stumbling through a lot of that right now, honestly. In the beginning, I thought that I would have a harder time dealing with syringes and supplies. But again, though, I think I was like taught this narrative that I had to like be away from things, or else like when I had that narrative of powerlessness, I like would tell myself that I couldn't see it, or I would do it, or all these things that like have not actually shown themselves to be true. I have not been that triggered by supplies, and often, I mean, people will pull stuff out, and we have these like huge 16-gallon Sharps containers, and they're like, I will sometimes inadvertently see drugs, and like it has not bothered me at all. Like, and that was kind of surprising. I did think that that would be an issue, but it just hasn't been. Seeing people suffering is hard. And it looks like different things. I mean, like there was one time, one of the first times I had a really hard, like emotional reaction. There was a woman, she rolled up in a minivan and she had an infant in the back seat. And I was just like working out what to give her, and she didn't have anything to exchange. So I just had to ask her some questions. And she was honest and told me that she hadn't used in a year and a half, and she had had her baby. But over the last so much time, like she essentially was like plotting her relapse. And like as a harm reductionist, like how I'm supposed to like not judge and just like make sure that they have access to safe supplies, and everything in me like wanted to hold her. Like I wanted to hug her. I could like feel her pain. Like my empathy was like boiling out of me, and I wanted to be like, don't do it, girl. Like, don't do it. It'll be okay. Like I wanted to save her in this way that I couldn't. And it was hard. It was really hard. So like things like that happen that I haven't expected. One of my, I say favorites, I really shouldn't do that. I'll say that to you guys. I certainly don't say it to them, but there's this one woman who I've worked with for years in different programs, and she's like a younger version of me. Like she has been everywhere 12 times, like just intense stuff. And she came last week and like told me she had been raped at gunpoint, and like I care about her a lot, and like stuff like that's really hard. It's hard even right now. I also, last story, and I'll move on. I had someone say a whole lot to me about a murder that had happened recently. And she was high on meth, and she just like would not stop talking. And she said all this stuff to me that I like did not know about. And I went home and Googled, and like, it was all real. Like there was a naked woman's body found in the river. There was this whole thing. This woman had all this information about it. And I had to get some really serious supervision about what I had to do. And I did have to take some action, and it was really, really hard. And it's really important to me that they feel safe and that they know that we won't like rat on them. And I hate to say that, but like, that's what it's like in their experience. And the woman who's talking to me and telling me all this stuff, like she trusts me and she feels safe with me. And like, she's talking to me and not a detective for a reason, you know? But like, navigating through that stuff is hard. But I will say though, that like, I have experiences like that the average volunteer doesn't. But I know a lot of these people from working in the field the last handful of years in a way that like I have some pretty intense relationships built with some of them already. Oh, yeah, it's weird when I say all that out loud. It's like, yeah, like, yeah. It's I mean, it would surprise you too, because like you think it's a certain population, and it is. Like that population that you would expect very much is present. But there are other populations of people that you would be shocked are IV drug users. And there's a fair bit of that too. We have to be kind of careful sometimes, because we will have people that volunteer that are active in 12-step programs. And sometimes like they'll want to think that they're doing service work, or that they're gonna like, you know, scoop people into AA. And we have to like educate them in a way that that's not what this is. And sometimes like we have to make sure that we train them well enough that they're like, whoa, that was Joe from the Thursday night or whatever. You know what I mean? That they're seeing people that they're very surprised are actively using, and like that confidentiality stuff. And I do the best I can, because like I don't want to police people, but like our participants being safe is my number one priority. So like if we do have any volunteers that like I have the slightest inkling that our participant will be safe, I'll like put them on something else. Because it's hard, because you know, some people think this is like cool in this kind of like, and it's weird too, because we'll have people that say they volunteer with us but like don't actually, and I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, it's interesting, it's weird. I'm learning about some of that stuff as I'm going, but hopefully that answered your question, George.
So we have like 1 more minute, and if someone has pressing questions, Riley is awesome at responding and connecting. But I do want to end with like, what is one thing you do for yourself to protect your sobriety and your serenity and protect like your wellness as you go about this work?
Like for me, in that whole concept of like people finding their own pathway, like I have found my own, and like I know myself pretty well, and I know what does and doesn't work for me. Like taking large chunks of time, like literally I'm going out into the woods for a week with a community of people, turning off all technology. Like for me, nature connection stuff is really important. That's me in particular. But there is, and like, I have to have 2 phones, because I have to stop the noise in certain aspects. Just stuff like that. Like I mean, I feel like I could say a lot of specifics, but ultimately, like I've had to learn what does and doesn't work for me, and be gentle with myself when I'm like, okay, that I tried that and that doesn't work, you know? And I've gotten better at that, at being gentle with myself, because I've definitely made mistakes, you know, nothing epic, but like, you know, we learn as we go. Yeah.
Riley, thank you so much for coming today. You are an amazing person and a great human. And if you feel comfortable dropping like some kind of contact outreach, whether it be like social media, email, whatever is easiest. And for those that want their hours to count toward our little faux kind of certificate, we're collecting all of your hours across the course of the semester. So that way you have something to offer folks that might be employers that you say, like, I've studied this much outside of class. Heatherly dropped that Google Doc in the chat if you want to fill out that form to get your hours to count. And feel free to go ahead and kind of add your info there. Oh, I see it, accesspointgeorgia@gmail.com.
Yes, so that's the email. And then this is our website, any contacting through the website. And there's, I mean, the website's pretty basic, but like, if you want to make a donation, if you want to get involved, if you want to sign up for the newsletter, which I've been bad at lately, but that'll come back shortly. Anything like that, that's a good place to do it. You can follow us on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're not on Instagram yet. But you know what though, like we have a social media position that we need to be filled also. So, you know, but yeah, if you want anyone that wants to reach out to me, and you know what, like I don't have copious amounts of time, but I am passionate about this. And if somebody else is just getting turned on to this, and wants to get involved, like connect with me. I'm gonna put my phone number here too. Please do text first, because I won't answer my personal line with numbers I don't know, but there's my phone number too. So reach out if you want. I went way over, sorry. Thank you.
Don't apologize. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really value the work you're doing, and you're just so important. Thank you.
If you guys want to do like a round two or go deeper in anything like that, just as harm reduction as a whole, I'm all about that too. I have more PowerPoints than I can count.
Ooh, what about Narcan and naloxone training? Are y'all doing those again anytime? Okay.
Well, so we just did a training, but like you can come to any of our, even if you're not a user, literally, yeah, like we dispense naloxone and Narcan. There's a epic shortage of naloxone right now, so we just have the nasal Narcan, but we give that out and train you on how to use it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think it might be great to have a second where we could maybe do some other stuff, but thank you so much, Riley. You just have so much to offer. Y'all, thank you for coming today. This was great. Don't forget to fill out the form if you want your hours to count. And Riley, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks.
Y'all enjoy your Saturday. And don't forget, if you want to volunteer, fill out that form too at their website.
The sooner the better. Yep. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.